Advocacy is a term for creating change, political change, and pursuing that goal in a strategic way. Advocacy is an umbrella term for different ways of acting. One way is lobbying, which refers to direct meetings with decision makers, so face-to-face meetings or direct contacts, whether that's a phone call or that's an email, but you engage directly with the person or people in power. Campaigning is another way of doing advocacy, and campaigning then again is more about mobilizing people and operating through the public sphere and creating pressure towards politicians in that way. These two ways are not opposite to each other, so you can have a big campaign where somebody has the responsibility of meeting politicians and having the kind of lobbyist side of the campaign, but then the campaign itself is about engaging a wider public. Lobbying is often done by people who are quite thorough experts of their issue, because meeting with decision makers in person or having direct contact with decision makers or officials means often that you really have to know quite in detail what you're speaking of, and you also have to know the politics around the issue to be able to speak about it in the right way to the person in question. Whereas campaigning then again can involve a lot broader range of people who are passionate about the issue, who feel that there's something wrong, who want to have alternatives. And in that sense, campaigning is a broader range of people and also organizations. CSOs have a special role in advocacy because they often normally have the connection to the broader public. So mobilizing campaigns is a quite natural way for many CSOs to act. Then again, when it comes to lobbying, traditionally that sphere has been dominated by the private sector, who then lobby in their own interest on their behalf, or who hire people to speak on their behalf to decision makers. But CSOs actually have a quite important role in the whole lobbying sphere, because, as I remember, for example, one member of parliament once saying, there are way too little people and organizations speaking on behalf of the broader public in the corridors of power, and that's where CSOs can also have a special role. The main ethical challenges, I think, relate to lobbying as a way of doing advocacy, and precisely to the fact that the private sector has been doing a lot of lobbying, and usually it's done behind closed doors. So there's a huge issue of transparency that's then often at stake. And when CSOs engage in lobbying, it's important then to keep in mind that the people, the organization that they represent, know about what's been discussed in this meeting, and that they really try and increase the transparency of the lobbying work. Another quite traditional problem is that of representation. So if I, for example, lobby for a big campaign, how am I the right person to represent all those people? But that's a tricky question, and that's something that's always going to be around, and I think by having a dialogue and having enough transparency with the people who you represent, you can also get over that obstacle. One key political challenge is that if you operate in the given political sphere, you might not be actually able to obtain the changes, the real structural changes that you want to obtain. So one example is nowadays when we speak about inequality and that we need to increase the gap between the rich and the poor, while at the same time, very often the decision makers can be the wealthiest people in many countries, and therefore kind of engaging in trying to advocate for them to get rid of their own interests or to somehow lessen what they have might be a wrong strategy, and then you have to perhaps engage in the issue in a different way. Another challenge that we have is that societies and political spheres are very different. So Finland, for example, is a very democratic and non-corrupt country, and therefore doing advocacy here can be very different than in a country which is quite undemocratic, where corruption is a typical characteristic of the political culture. And then in those contexts, or in every context, you have to make your own choices when you draw up an advocacy plan on what are actually the right ways of acting.